So after you've completed a pre-design, you're required to mark what type of site survey we want the site survey team to do for this home. A site survey is where they actually go out and measure the home. Now, depending on what we mark, they will do different types of measurements. You do that at the end of your pre-design by going into the Edit menu on Zendesk. Now, we've already gone over how to complete a pre-design. You mark it from in progress to complete. You put the date it was completed and the time it was completed at. You have to keep scrolling down until you find a section called Site Survey Type. Now, if I click here, it's a drop-down menu and have all these different options for different site survey types. You have standard, standard plus suneye and outbuilding, traditional, traditional plus suneye, traditional plus outbuilding. So those are all important things that we need to talk about right now. To look at the different definitions of each of the site survey types, we can come over to the props wiki. There's a whole page for it called Site Survey Types. The first one here is called Standard. Standard is the basic one you're going to use for the majority of the houses you build. Let's take a look at an example of that. I've got a house here in Aurora, and this house I would mark as a standard site survey type. I would mark it that way because I can clearly see all the edges of the roof. There's no trees blocking it at all. The image is high enough quality that I can see where all the folds are, and I am pretty confident on the main structure of the home. Now notice, it's a little bit lower res, and that's okay. It's still going to be a standard site survey type, because I'm pretty confident that we have the structure of the home correct. All right, let's talk about one that's a little bit more tricky. This one is the traditional site survey. We use traditional site survey when the imagery is extremely poor quality, and we have to kind of guess on the structure. Guess is the key word there. You're not confident on the structure of the home for one reason or another, so you have to kind of guess on what's there. That could be due to any sort of visual blockage of the roof, caused by trees or obstructions. Another example is if the image is such low resolution that we can't even see the folds or the features on the roof. Now remember, like I said, it can still be low res as long as we can kind of see the structure of the home. But if it's so blurry that we can't even see ridges or valleys or anything like that, then we'll probably mark it as a traditional site survey type because we had to kind of guess on where those things were. Another example of when you mark traditional is extremely skewed imagery. If the only image that you have available to build off of is extremely skewed, it's going to cause you to have to guess where a lot of the features are. That's going to be a case where you're going to want to mark traditional site survey. And I'll show you an example of that one in a second. Another example of when you mark traditional site survey is for flat roofs. If you have a flat roof on your house that's big enough to place panels on, and it is 10 degrees pitch or lower, we would mark that home as a traditional site survey. Now this 10 degrees here is just what they've requested from the site survey team for what qualifies as a flat roof. We normally don't treat roofs flat unless they're 5 degrees or lower here in the proposals department. That's mostly just for when we're placing panels and how we lay them on a flat roof. As far as a site survey goes, however, we consider anything 10 degrees and below flat enough for the site survey team to measure it to see if it's close enough to flat. So here's an example of where you'd mark traditional because of skewed imagery. This image that this person built off of is extremely skewed. You can tell because this is supposed to be an aerial top-down view, and we can see the whole front side of the house. You can see a door right here and windows right here. That means the house image is skewed. Let's take a look here when we turn on Lidar. Now you can see where Lidar says the ridge is, doesn't match up to where the image says it is. But it looks like Lidar is matched correctly to the gutters. So that's a good indication that your house image is skewed. Now, just as a quick side note here, when you get a house like this and you have to build on a skewed image, the first step you want to take is just match up your Lidar to the gutters, then match the gutters of your house to that Lidar where the gutters are supposed to be first. Because things that sit lower are going to be less skewed than things that sit higher. And then from there, as long as your Lidar is set correctly, we just match the pitch to Lidar. So this person did a really good job with that here, and they matched it up to Lidar, not necessarily to the image, because in this case, the image is unreliable. Now you'll notice that when we turn off Lidar, the ridge on their model is also not matched up to the ridge on the image. Now notice when you place your obstructions, you also have to take that into account. These square vent obstructions that often line ridges on this home are right next to the ridge in the image. So that means that yours that you place need to be right next to your ridge, not the ridge of the image. So since your ridge is scooted over, you have to scoot your obstructions as well. So notice here, the obstructions are not placed directly where the image says they are, it's where they're supposed to be by the ridge. You can see that they've done that with their other pipes, as well as the dormer over here. The dormer, you can see in the image, says it sits a little bit higher, but they're taking into account the skewed nature of it, and they've scooted it down a little bit, which is the correct thing to do. Now, when you do stuff like this, that means you're guessing. Remember the key word for traditional? They're guessing where all those things are going to be. So in this case, they would mark this home as a traditional site survey. So every home you're going to either mark as standard or traditional. So it's always going to be one of those two. However, you might have some other things added onto those in the site survey. So either standard plus outbuilding or standard plus suneye, or traditional plus outbuilding or traditional plus suneye. Let's go into an example to show you what an outbuilding would be. So basically an outbuilding is any other building on the property that is not the house that is big enough to put panels on that we have actually placed panels on to use. So in this case, we have the home here, but we also have this garage up here that is definitely big enough to fit panels on. So if it's the best roof base to get sun or the customer requests that they place them on the garage here, we definitely want to build that out in the pre-design. So I've placed panels on it here, and we have panels on a building that is not the main house. In this case, since the image is very clear and we're confident of the roof structure, we would mark it as standard. But since we've placed panels on this garage out here as well, we would mark it as standard plus outbuilding for the site survey. There's a big caveat here, however. If I did not use this garage, or in other words, if I did not place panels on it, and I only placed panels on the house, I would not mark it as outbuilding. So, once again, if I've only placed panels on the main house and not the outbuilding, then I only mark it as standard. I don't need to mark plus outbuilding. So how it looks right now, I would just mark it as standard. Just regular standard, no plus outbuilding there. Now let's talk about the other add-on item called plus suneye. Once again, you're going to mark it as standard or traditional, but you're adding plus suneye to it. So an important thing to know is that we only do suneye in the state of Oregon. It does not matter if all the other criteria is met. If it is not in the state of Oregon, we do not mark it as suneye. So here we have an account in Oregon. Suneye is all about Lidar. When we mark plus suneye, we're essentially telling them, please redo the Lidar scan because it's out of date. So how do you tell if a Lidar scan is out of date? A good example to look for is trees. So turn on your Lidar, and I can see in this image that Lidar is picking up a very massive tree in this area here. However, if I turn Lidar off and I look at this image, I can see that there is no longer a tree there. So that tree has been removed since the last Lidar scan. So that means that Lidar is out of date. In this case, we would mark this as standard plus suneye for the site survey. Another way you can tell that Lidar is out of date is look for buildings. If Lidar says the ground is flat or the image says there is a building, so right here it says the Lidar is flat, but if we turn it off and there was a house in the image right there, it means that that house has been built since the last Lidar scan and that the scan needs to be redone. So we would mark that one as plus suneye as well. And it's important to note that it can be anywhere in your area. It's not just on the property that you're currently drawing on. If we sell in that area again, we want the Lidar to be up to date. So look in your whole captured image, look for any signs that Lidar might be out of date. And if there is anything, you can mark it as plus suneye along with your standard or traditional, whatever it is. Now just remember, that's only for Oregon for suneye. So once you've decided which site survey it's going to be, you're going to come back to Zendesk and go into the edit menu. Now, just a reminder, remember to have it marked as from in progress to complete with your name on it with the date and time it was completed. Then scroll down to the site survey type. Now select the site survey you want from the drop-down menu here. Now let's say in this case, I was marking one that was traditional site survey plus suneye. So once I select the site survey, I hit save. Now, anytime that you mark a site survey type other than standard, you need to leave a note as to why you did that. So if you marked it as standard site survey, you're done. You don't need to leave a note. But anything else besides just regular standard, you need to leave a note as to why that's the case. So let's go here in Zendesk and we click in this box here to leave a note. So in my note, I'm going to say marked as traditional site survey. And I have to explain why I marked it traditional. Due to extremely skewed imagery. Now, since I also am marking suneye, I would add marked as suneye due to Lidar being out of date on some trees in the area. Then underneath you need to do a dash with your name after it, and in parentheses put your department. Then just hit save. So I don't actually want to leave this note on this account, so I'm just going to cancel, but normally you'd hit save. But that's what your note should look like. You need to mark what you did, why you did it, and then your name and department. So that's site survey. If you're ever confused on which site survey is what, just go to the props wiki, go to the site surveys tabs, and the description of all of them is right there for you.